Hello and good afternoon, everyone from a rarely sunny Oxford today. I'm pleased to report. My name is Jonathan Dover. I'm one of the recruitment managers for the Executive MBA program here at Oxford. And specifically, I have responsibility for Africa as one of my regions. So this is a particularly special session that we're running today because it's been an opportunity to bring together three of our Hasmukh Patel Graduate Scholars. We have the current scholar and also a couple of previous holders as well. So really excited to get chatting to them about their experience on the program and beyond. You're all probably aware who are joining today that we here at Saïd Business School we have a long track record of focusing on Africa, not just on the Executive MBA program, but across the school. And typically within each Executive MBA cohort, we'll have between 10 and 15% of the class based in Africa. And also one of our electives is delivered in Africa too, with a focus specifically on doing business on the continent. So it's something we've had a focus on for a long time. The main objective today is to get into a panel discussion with our guests. So we'll get to that very shortly. But first of all, I just wanted to share some information on the program to those of you joining the call. I'm aware that everyone will be at a very different stage in terms of their research into the program and potential application journey, but this will hopefully be just a little bit of a recap for most of you. So yeah, if you're to go ahead and apply, this is what you'd be getting into. So the Executive MBA is a part-time modular program made up of between 14 to 18 week-long modules over between 22 to 24 months. So if you start the program in January, it's 22 months, slightly compressed format, 24 months if you start it in September. Typically in your Executive MBA cohort, there will be between 60 and 70 students. We'll get on to the class demographics in a second. But you'll see there that the course is split into 11 core subjects, then your integrative project, and 4 electives that you get to choose in the second part of the program. Particularly, as mentioned, wanted to draw your attention to the elective that you can take inside Africa, which is called Inclusive Business in Africa. And that's all about doing business in the African context. And it's a great opportunity to meet with lots of really interesting local entrepreneurs and local corporates. Next slide, please, Hannah. Yeah, so this is the breakdown of our September 25 cohort. This is fairly typical, I would say. Every cohort has a couple of its own kind of idiosyncrasies and nuances, but this is probably a good example of what you could expect. So 70 people in the class. 31% of the class being female, and that sort of varies between 30 and 40% on average. 37 different nationalities represented in that class, so a truly global mix. And around typically 16 years work experience is around the average for the class. There are outliers to that at both ends of the spectrum. 24 employment sectors represented, so a huge level of diversity as well in terms of industries represented, and that helps to bring a real richness to the discussion. And the average age is usually in and around 40, give or take. Next slide, please, Hannah. Yeah, so just wanted to highlight the application deadlines for our next couple of intakes, particularly relevant to, I would guess, the vast majority of people on this call today is the upcoming deadline for the September intake, which is the 16th of March, and that's our third deadline. And that is also the deadline by which you would need to apply in order to be considered for the Hasmukh Patel Graduate Scholarship. So it's only available for the September intake. It's one fully funded place available for an African applicant each year, and you need to apply for the September intake and by that deadline to be considered. So that's an important one to bear in mind. You'll see there are a couple of further deadlines after that, but you would not be considered for the scholarship if you apply after the March the 16th deadline. Next slide, please, Anna. And these are the deadlines, sort of equivalent, if you like, for our January 27 intake. So you'll see a similar kind of setup in terms of the spacing. And the first deadline for that intake is coming up on the same date, so the 16th of March, and then a further 4 deadlines beyond that, as you can see there. Next slide, please. So yeah, without further ado, on to the main event of today, and very pleased to welcome three of the people that you can see on the screen there. Unfortunately, Wangari, who you can see at the bottom left there, wasn't able to join us due to a last minute work commitment that she just couldn't get out of. But we are joined by three of our Hasmukh Patel scholars. First of all, we'll hear from Helio, who was actually the first Hasmukh Patel scholar. So great to have him on the call today. And also Linda, who's the most recent one, and Lorato in the middle. So you've got a good spectrum of people who, in terms of their timings and experience on the program and all of that. But yeah, if I can just get you guys to quickly introduce yourselves, tell us a bit about your background, what you're up to now, and then we'll get into your experience on the program and your journey in terms of the scholarship as well. But Helio, do you want to kick us off just sort of in chronological order?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Great to be here and speak to and engage with you all today. So my name is Helio Kumbi. I am a Mozambican. I grew up between sort of Mozambique and the UK. I went to university at the University of Newcastle before my master's, so read law at the University of Newcastle, and before then I studied at a boarding school in Eswatini. Larato and I studied in the same boarding school actually, called United World College. When I got back from my degree at Newcastle to Mozambique, my passion is always to try and make a difference, in my community and on the continent, of course. I worked as a lawyer initially, then I started up my own investment company where we invested in sort of high growth areas, tech, mining, extractives, property development. And Then we decided because I was getting married that I needed some stability in my life. So to get a real job for a little bit of time, and so I started to work as the director for British Trade in Mozambique. And From there, ExxonMobil made a huge discovery of gas in Mozambique, which is the largest undiscovered gas in the world. It will be the largest single investment in Africa, $30 billion. And so I moved from the British High Commission to ExxonMobil to lead our commercial and government engagements in Mozambique to get this project up and running. Um, at some point, I wanted to get back to my entrepreneurial roots, which is a passion of mine, especially in the access to finance space. And so I was looking across the globe to, what programs would help me best position myself for that. And Oxford, of course, came up as number one. And so I applied, and my plan was to leave my job once I had graduated and start my passion project. But the corporation had different plans for me, so they moved me to Washington, D.C. to a bigger role, which I thought I could not pass up on. But at the same time, still working on my passion project. It was actually my entrepreneurial project while I was at Oxford Business School, and working with some of my colleagues to do that, which is access to finance in Mozambique. So I will stop there for now before.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, for now, that's
Yeah.
that's just the start. But yeah, so over to you, Lorato. We'll keep going in chronological order if you want to give us a similar introduction to yourself.
Happily. Thank you, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. My name is Lerato Molefe. I am originally from Botswana. I'm based in Johannesburg. Like Helio, I studied law as my second degree, I suppose. I was in the US. And like Helio, as he said, I started my academic career at an international school in Eswatini called Waterford Kamhlaba. Um, I spent about 15 years in the US, practicing law, studying, and then finally decided to move back home in 2009. And I have done all sorts of things since I've been back. I've been in practice, I've run a consulting business, I joined a fintech in operations. The last role I had was running their strategic investments role, and that effectively inspired me to pursue an MBA. And since the EMBA, I have been back in South Africa. I run an advisory business that sort of sits at the intersection of transactions and governance, innovation, ethics. And effectively, I help organizations become more credible and investor ready. There's a lot of detail around that, but I'll leave it at that. But very excited to be here, and I hope a lot of you will apply for the scholarship. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Lorato. And last but by no means least, Linda, who's our current Hasmukh Patel Scholar.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I'm really glad to be here. Greetings to everyone from a very sunny Kenya. I actually started my career in biochemistry, and I worked in that field like for 1 or 2 years. And then I had engagements with development programs in the country, just connected through the pharmaceutical industry where I was working. And I changed. I had a career shift. I began working in development programs in Kenya. I've been doing that for the past 17 years. So basically, educational projects, empowerment projects for vulnerable youth, and then also for women. So in addition to that, we've been running. I'm currently the Chief Sustainability Officer of the foundation. This is Kianda Foundation. So basically what we do is to run empowerment programs for women and youth, and we also play advisory roles for two programs, one in Uganda and another in Nigeria. So then we are working with more than 50,000 youth across the country. In addition to that, I hold some roles, non-executive roles with Safaricom Foundation. I also am on the board of KEPSA, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and then an expert in a UNESCO expert group for vocational training. After 15 or so years in the development field and beginning to work more in a director role and looking a lot at the financial sustainability of programs, I was really interested in doing an EMBA, also because the philanthropy space is changing quite a bit, and we are looking at a shift from philanthropy to impact investing. We are looking at many philanthropists beginning already to think about also venture philanthropy. So I was really excited about joining the EMBA in Oxford and actually receiving this scholarship. It has been life-changing already, just a few months down the line. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Linda. And yeah, some really kind of interesting bits coming out of those intros, just in terms of the kind of diversity of experience that you guys all have, but also some common threads as well in terms of how you kind of came onto the program, how you sort of found out about it, your original motivation. So I'd like to sort of explore that in a bit more detail, if I may. And I should just say it to the audience as well that if you do have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll try and get through as many of those as possible, as well as a couple of topics I want to cover as well. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the scholarship itself, and I guess just curious to hear from our panelists, first of all, how you found out about it initially, and sort of how pivotal that was in your application to the Oxford program specifically, and I guess were you already very much in a frame of mind where you were going to do an executive MBA come what may, or was that really what tipped the balance? So yeah, Helio, do you want to kick us off on that one?
Yeah, sure. It was sort of, lifelong plan of mine to do an MBA to support me move from working in corporates to entrepreneurship, especially entrepreneurship focused in impact and Africa. And so I did my research, and again, as I said, Oxford came number one. when I combined all of the aspects that I needed in order to better prepare myself for my future, or what I saw, what I envisaged for my future. And, we make plans, and God laughs, right? Yeah, so and it's interesting because I wasn't even when I first applied. I didn't look into the Hasmukh Patel scholarship. In fact, because it was new, right? I was the first, and so it was great to see that on top of all of the research that I had done about Africa and about the Oxford MBA and how it can impact my work in Africa, that on top of that, you were putting in measures to support Africans to continue in this learning journey. So, just validated all of my research.
Perfect. And maybe if you could just elaborate a little bit on sort of how you came to decide on Oxford as where you wanted to study, because you clearly researched other programs and you had a quite specific idea of what you wanted to get out of an executive MBA. So yeah, maybe
Yep.
if you could just speak to how you arrived at that decision initially.
Yeah, so the big thing for me was I wanted to start my business as soon as I'd finished the Oxford MBA, and I was looking at what programs can support building these capabilities within the entrepreneurial space. And the specific entrepreneurial project, right, that the Saïd Business School has for me was a big differentiator, and it actually made a huge difference, right? Putting in practice and going through all of the scenarios of what I wanted to do in the future. So that was
Perfect.
the
And
main piece.
this may come out in some of the questions we get from the floor, but yeah, I imagine there are quite a few people who are interested in that entrepreneurial angle and are perhaps looking to start or scale businesses. And yeah, I think it's useful to hear from someone like yourself that that was a big motivator. Um, Loretta, do you want to speak to that same point as well?
So my journey to Oxford was a little bit different. I had considered doing an MBA before I joined the fintech that I moved over to. In fact, joining one of the motivations for joining the MBA, the fintech was the idea that I could get this commercial experience without going to school. But I don't know that I was really thinking about doing an MBA before that experience. In fact, I did my law degree at Harvard, and there's a very big relationship with Harvard Business School. Obviously, I had a lot of friends at the business school, and didn't apply, and just was quite happy being this commercial lawyer. But particularly after joining the strategic investments team and setting it up and running it, I just it just felt like this was the direction that I sort of found the place where all the things I like to do, that I know how to do, that I want to do more of came together. And I felt an MBA could really just hold that together and structure it in a way, but also signal to the market. And I don't know if Helios had this experience. I don't know if it's true, how universally true it is. But one of the things that's true about South Africa is, I believe, because you do law as a first degree, it's very hard for people to see you as anything but a lawyer if that's part of your background. Where I find in the US, for instance, it's a second degree, and so nobody blanches if you have a law degree, but you never spend a day in the profession. And so it had been a bit of a frustration. But I effectively, once I was in the strategic investment space, I decided that I really needed to sort of shake off or rebalance this legal coat that I was wearing, and thought an MBA would do it. And because of that, I didn't want to spend a lot of money. And so I did look at some of the international executive MBAs. I looked at INSEAD, I looked at Trium, but I just couldn't make it make sense. Strangely, Oxford didn't actually come on my radar until I was applying to South African business schools. And I think, as you sort of keep visiting the websites of GSB in Cape Town and VETS in Johannesburg, the algorithms pick up that you're interested in MBA programs. And I just one day got a pop-up on my screen about Saïd and Oxford University, and particularly about the Hasmukh Patel Scholarship. So I don't think I would have applied to Oxford had it not been for the scholarship. And the more I learned about the scholarship, the more I thought, okay, if there is a chance in hell that you could get this might be worth pursuing. And so I put together my application for Oxford. And I remember by the time I submitted my application, thinking that whether I get the scholarship or not, I have to go to Oxford. And it was really just that this was a school, like I say, I have a lot of friends who've done MBAs, not just at Harvard, but in other schools around the world. And I just thought there was something really special about Saïd Business School. Not only that the EMBA is structured as it is, but I think it's quite unique in how it has a relatively strong focus on Africa for a school that is not based on the continent. And that goes into sort of the percentage of African students that are in a class, both in the MBA but also in the EMBA. It goes to the way that there are programs. You mentioned, Jonathan, the program in Cape Town that, students actually brought to the continent. There are real relationships with the continent. But what I discovered once I was there, even in terms of the content, it really is a global MBA. And I think because I was coming from venture, startup, the entrepreneurial bent was very important to me. And Oxford has a very strong entrepreneurial focus. But I love that it's not just looking at the commercial. There's a very strong focus on impact, on social entrepreneurship, the Skull Foundation being there. And so all these things came together. And really, by the time I submitted my application, I was determined to find the money one way or the other. And that's my story.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. And I think just worth kind of emphasizing that as you've touched on there, that the scholarship, as as you would expect, is extremely competitive. There's obviously only one fully funded place per academic year. So everyone who's sort of on this panel today has done exceptionally well to be awarded with a scholarship. But I think for everyone who's on the call today, and absolutely aim for the stars, as it were. But I think it is, if you're really sort of determined to apply for the program, it's definitely worth sort of having either a plan B or some sort of backup in terms of how you might fund the program if your scholarship application isn't successful, because unfortunately, just out of sheer weight of numbers, that is the case for quite a few people. But I think that's just worth emphasizing. I think there's been a question in the chat actually around just what the scholarship actually covers. So I'll take that one just briefly now. All the details are on the website, but the scholarship itself basically covers your full tuition for the program. So you would still need to cover your things like your travel and your accommodation when you're in Oxford. I know that has changed sort of slightly over the course of the years that the scholarship's been available, but that's the current state of play with that. And while we're talking about current state of play, we'll hand over to Linda for her thoughts on that, because you're obviously our current scholar and have the sort of the most up-to-date experience in terms of how you're finding the course. And the impact that it's having on your career thus far in terms of the day-to-day. Maybe that's maybe an area that we can explore with you, rather than sort of obviously impact post-EMBA, which the other guys will be able to speak to. But so yeah, how are you finding everything so far?
All right. So so far it's amazing. Like, it's really, really, really amazing. I know everyone on this call is here because they would like to go to Oxford, but this has been the most amazing and the most worthwhile decision that I made. When going into Oxford, I'm just going to speak first to the history around Oxford. This is this is something which for me was very unique when I began to look at business schools, and I had applied also to IMD and to ESA, and had received some partial scholarships from those. But then when I began to look at Oxford and to read more about Oxford, something about the history of Oxford really called to me, and the involvement, as has been mentioned, on the African continent, the development of the African continent, even just the proportions of the students in the classes from Africa, and not only from Africa, but really the scope. It's global, not only because like the different units may be held in different places, but just looking at my classmates, it's like looking at an atlas, yeah? Like the whole world comes there. So for me, Oxford has really been like a melting point for the whole world coming together. So an invaluable network. That's the first thing I'm going to say, Jonathan. The network has been invaluable. Just when you were putting the statistics about the S25 class, I looking at it, I was like, this is exactly the reason why this network is so rich. In my current role, I have been able, just from my classmates, to receive such valuable input, ideas, which we have actually carried out and tried out, connections. And I remember just sitting next to someone and then chatting before class and speaking about some of our programs. And then he says, I know somebody in the States who actually gives vaccines and also gives like medical supplies. And I said, oh my God, we run a clinic. And immediately in 5 minutes, I had an email, a contact. That's Oxford for me. Yeah, that's like Saïd Business School. Now, more to the content of the course, which is really important. I am going to actually speak about two, just because of the brevity of what this context, but the two specific subjects, three actually, which have really been impactful so far. So the first one was analytics, which I actually didn't think was going to be so impactful. But then by the time we finished that unit, I mean, I was sending WhatsApps back to the office and saying we need to make better use of the data that we have in order to make decisions. And that has really been sort of like a shift in the foundation and in how we manage programs and how we make use of the data. So that was fantastic. Strategy was also amazing. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer. I'm looking a lot at the financial sustainability of the programs. I'm looking really to see whether these programs, like what's the future after 10 years, after 50 years, after 100 years, should we even start these programs? And strategy for me has been like a sort of opening a door into a world where you have all these tools that you can use to make decisions. That has been fantastic. And the last one I'm going to talk about is governance and ethics. I had someone speak already about ethics here and governance. And this, as this is like the African context, this is a very interesting, this has been very interesting for me because it has also been sort of like a playbook and an awareness of the fact that, you know, with doing good with business, doing good and doing good with business, doing good through business, and even in terms of the income generating activities which we run in our projects, this has really been useful. Okay, I'm going to, I can see Jonathan nodding, perhaps looking at the watch, so I'll just stop there. But I hope I've managed to transmit like how amazing this program is. That it's really amazing. One more thing I have to say, I have to speak about the team, like the program team and how supportive they are. I actually have to say it's, I'm going to make you blush here, Jonathan, but then I actually have to say that when in all my applications, I felt that the communication that I had with Oxford was like the warmest, the most welcoming. That's something I must say. And then the program team on the ground is really supportive as well. And another great highlight has been the executive coaching that we can have in the program. That's it so far.
Thank you, Linda. And yeah, luckily I put the non-blushing function on Zoom, so no one could no one could see that. So that was good. And yeah, great to have your insight there, because obviously you're living and breathing this at the moment. and probably a relief to Helio, I think, because his program knowledge probably isn't maybe quite as sharp as it was back in the day. So yeah, good to have the up to date info there. And yeah, so some really good examples, I think, just in terms of how you're implementing that in the day to day, and also the Oxford network as well, and the power of that, not just within your cohort, but sort of business school wide and university wide as well. And I wanted to chat a little bit about that because obviously one of the great things about Oxford is the university setting, which is a little bit different to some other programs, some other schools. So I wanted to get the panel to chat a little bit about their experience in terms of Oxford, not just SBS, and maybe just say something to how you either interacted with your college or sort of really took advantage of the wider university piece. So, Lorato, do you want to give us your insight on that one?
I was just rifling through my memories and trying to think. I do think, well, one of the most special things about Oxford is that it is a university town. And so you're always in the university, no matter where you're going, what you're doing. You could be going to pick up dry cleaning and you're walking past the student union, for instance. So you feel that all the time. And I think with that comes an what's the word? Engagement, like a contact with schools and faculties and disciplines that you might not otherwise interact with, particularly given the nature of the EMBA, where you fly in, you drive in, you train in for a week or two at a time, and then you go back to, wherever you call home. And I mean, just comparing it, for instance, with Harvard, where I was at the law school, I lived in town, but I had so much, but I was there full time and I spent 3 full years there. And I think I can fairly say that in the 2 years of the MBA, I engaged much more widely with other parts of Oxford just because it's always around you. And so I have friends from the medical school and from the chemistry department, and some of that is frankly through the African connection, because um, I was connected with some of the African organizations, but I think some of it is also just, meeting people in a bar at night, or if you have a hobby, maybe you have a friend who plays squash and he's Brazilian and he had friends from different schools that he had met through his, the squash court. So yeah, it's also really great to be in an environment, and I think particularly when you've been out of academia. I'm someone who very much likes being a student. I think if the opportunity cost for the rest of life wasn't so high, I would very happily be a student for the rest of my life. But I like reading. I like, consuming knowledge just for knowledge's sake. And it's really lovely to be in an environment where you are surrounded by other people who are there to learn and there to just, take in information and knowledge, and everybody has their area of focus and what they're interested in. I think those are probably the two highlights for me about Oxford, the town, Oxford, the university.
Perfect, thank you. And yeah, I think it's a really good point about that sort of intellectual curiosity. I think that's definitely a kind of common thread that we see through the vast majority of our participants. But then people are typically here not just to get what they can out of the course, but they really are here to learn and have that sort of thirst for knowledge, just as you say, for almost learning for learning's sake quite often. So yeah, I think that's definitely a common theme that you see, and I think partly part of that is down to the university setting and the chance to get involved in lots of different academic disciplines and so on. So yeah, thank you for that. Helio, similar question to you, I guess, but if you could also maybe just touch on some of the kind of Africa specific stuff that you were able to get involved with while you were at the school. Maybe chat a little bit about the Africa Forum, for example, which I know that you managed to get involved in a bit when you were at the school as well. So yeah, kind of similar question, but maybe just focusing more on the Africa stuff, if you could.
Yeah, it's I was laughing as Larato was speaking about this lifelong learning. I think especially for the EMBA, a lot of people have this bug, right?
Mm.
And because of the access to all of the different sort of faculties and schools, There comes a point, I think it's sort of end of year one, where everybody thinks, oh, maybe I'll just carry on and do a PhD at the, Vatnik
Yeah.
School of Government or something, right? And then end of year two comes in, it's like, no, I have a real, there's a world out there that I need to pay for, and so I need to get back to work. But the access to all of that is amazing, and the conversations that those bring about are amazing too. Um, there are two, I think, in terms of the networks, two examples that have stuck with me until today, of course. One is, and I'm not sure if you remember this, Jonathan, but there was and so it's, the connections not only in Oxford physically, but, that come about because of the Oxford University, when you had this session in Houston.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and there were some folks that joined Oxford, and one of them was Peter from Guyana. And so there's, huge energy projects in Guyana, fastest growing economy in the world at the moment. And when he spoke to me that day, he said, "Hey, Helio, do you think that if I were to get into Oxford, you could help me get a job with ExxonMobil in Guyana?" And I sort of said, "Yeah, maybe," and he got in, he kept in touch. And lo and behold, he's now working for ExxonMobil in Guyana, right? And so it's a full circle, right? And I think Oxford is the type of institution, right, that lends itself for this sort of thing. As soon as I told my colleagues in Guyana that he just graduated from the Oxford MBA, the doors flew open, right? And the second example is. So after I joined the Saïd Business School in Mozambique, and as you can imagine, Mozambique being Lusophone, there are very few, or it's less common to have this access to Anglophone schools. And a friend of mine, asked about the program and the benefits, and he applied. He got in, and then he became the minister for the presidency in Mozambique, right? And so these are the sort of profiles, right, of people, and the depth that you can associate yourself to and with when you're at Oxford, which is absolutely great. So going back to your question about the Africa Forum, yeah, there was a huge amount of interest, of course, not only from Africans but about Africa. When I was there in my cohort and beyond, got to engage and interact with people from all over the continent, but also people really interested in investing. The Cape Town module was a great one. And yeah, I believe it helps you, even as, somebody who has, grown up in Africa, of course, and invest all over. It's great to get this different perspective from folks from either different countries in Africa or outside. And it helps build that network for you to be able to continue to live your lifelong passion. One of my things was lifelong learning, as Lorato had also mentioned, and how I can give back to that. And so we started I had already started before I joined this UWC, so United World College, providing scholarships for Mozambicans for this. It's the international boarding school that Lorato and I went to that then help people get on to the most amazing journeys in life. And through the contacts at Oxford, I was able to raise even more sort of funding for this initiative that we have in Mozambique that's keeping going. And now we're trying to look at how we can scale that in terms of supporting the bridge between the boarding school and the universities that they go into. And none of that would have been possible without the time in Oxford and participating in these forums.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think that's just a really good example, or quite a few examples actually, of the kind of the Oxford network in action, really, just in terms of those links and connections. And yeah, it's an incredibly powerful thing, not just in terms of your own executive MBA cohort, but the wider business school as well, and all the different little offshoots to that network. I'm going to hand back to Linda at this point because I want to focus a little bit more on the course itself and exactly how that's been impacting your sort of your everyday work in your current role, and sort of maybe if you could just give a couple of examples of things that you've been able to implement kind of in real time in your current role, because one of the sort of reasons behind the structure of the executive MBA here is that hopefully people are able to implement what they're learning on a continued basis as they progress through the course. So yeah, if you can maybe just give it a couple of examples of that in action.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I have commented about strategy before, and actually, so at the end, during the modules, you have maybe every 2 modules, different units, and then there is an assessment at the end of that, and then the assessment is like a sort of a case study that you work on. I was really excited about the strategy unit because I could see so much scope for application in my role. So one of the things that we've been doing in the foundation is basically trying to see how to combine the governance of different projects, basically just to help smaller projects to grow and to distribute resources, I would say, in a more efficient manner. And so my strategy project was actually a real-time project about what I was doing. And that was amazing because it helped us really to put in place what perhaps before had just been a dream or something that we thought, yeah, it would be good to do this. But just doing the strategy assessment, we did it. Yeah, we did it. It was the assignment, but it's actually something that we did and we rolled out. And that was really, I think that was fantastic. The other thing that I would say that has also, this is really interesting. Just from like I spoke about the coaching, and then we also have the executive careers team right there in the university, the expansion of network. So this is something else that has changed a bit my role. I'm in charge of partnerships at the foundation. So this expansion of network has helped me also to be able to, we have actually, I was going to say 1.5 new donors, but hopefully 2 because we might sign up something soon. But that has really been fantastic in terms of fundraising for the foundation and basically helping the foundation to be more sustainable in its projects in the future. So I would, those are 2 key examples that I can speak about so far.
Right, thanks, Linda, and yeah, thank you for highlighting the career services team because they're one of the most important resources available to our executive MBA students and other programs across the school, and everyone on the program has an opportunity to work really closely with them, whether that's to facilitate a pivot into a different industry sector or to work on things like their CV and interviewing technique. There's all sorts of resources available. Yeah, definitely would encourage anyone who applies to the program to really take advantage of that, because I think there is a certain level of proactivity required from an executive MBA student to get involved with the career services team, because it's not as structured a part of the program as it is for the traditional full-time MBA. So great to hear some kind of real world examples of that in action. There's another question's come through for you on the chat, Linda, so I'm just going to put that to you while we have you. So Bakani would like to know that as you were looking at your options between schools in South Africa and Oxford, what tipped you to pursue Oxford as your preferred choice? And I'm guessing
Okay.
he means African schools in general rather than South Africa.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a really good question. In Kenya, for example, we have Strathmore University, which is a really good university, and was an option. So why Oxford? Why out of Africa? So we have like maybe 12 development partners who are maybe 6 are governments, like foreign governments that we work with, and then other NGOs in Europe, in the States, and in the UK. So why Oxford? So what I really wanted, thinking about the MBA and the possibilities of doing it in Kenya and the possibilities of doing it out of Kenya, What I felt was invaluable is two things, like the network that I would be able to get in Oxford, the exposure to the world. I had done a master's previously in Spain and another study in Italy. And for that reason, I understood how important it is sometimes to get out of our space, to get into another space and learn. And just thinking of the few months I've spent in Oxford, I think I touched on this before. The network is something which I don't even think it's difficult to calibrate. It's difficult to explain how useful that network is. The friendships, she commented about the late night beers in the pubs, but the friendships, the conversations, how enriching they are, how useful they are. It's like building in 5 months, I have gotten to know 70 new people and their networks, and people are really keen to connect you to other networks. So this is something which I think I would never have gotten anywhere else, and specifically thinking about attending business schools on the continent.
Yeah, and I think that's a really underrated part of the experience is the strength of those connections that the people make with their cohort, because I think there's often an assumption that because it's a part-time program, people will sort of kind of be like ships that pass in the night, basically. But people do develop really sort of kind of intense connections quite quickly, and those remain in place, a long time after graduation, as I'm sure Helio and Lorato would attest as well. So yeah, thank you for that. I want to chit chat finally just about impact from the program, and I think Helio, you're probably well placed to talk about this. So, sort of just impact of the program post graduation. Sort of, how have you kind of continued to implement what you've learned? I mean, you've already sort of touched on a lot of the kind of the door opening capability of the program, but yeah, anything else that you would add just in terms of the impact that the program's had, and I guess return on investment, for want of a better phrase.
There you go. Yeah, no, so in my particular case, huge impact. And what Lorato said was right. Regarding when you have a law degree, it's tough to pivot to more commercial sort of spaces, because people tend to pigeonhole you. And so this, what I was doing in ExxonMobil when I first started the EMBA to the responsibilities that I have now have completely expanded, right? So I'm at the forefront of our commercial negotiations. Rather than leading a team in one country, I'm the director for all of Africa in our international finance institutions. So specifically into finance and commerce as well. And so it's just, the impact for me has been astronomical, right? It's taken my family from Mozambique to having this, experience in the US where none of us had lived before. And really, I think it is it's sort of this vote of confidence from your peers and colleagues, right? They know that now that I have gone through this program, I am capable of taking on some of different and bigger responsibilities in this corporation. So the impact for me personally has been huge, right? And then of course there is the sort of broader impact in what I am able to do in my community, and I spoke about a few of those things with the UWC, for example, right? With the access to finance initiative that we're doing with some of the colleagues from our entrepreneurship program. So it's just been astronomical. I mean, I could go on and on. I know we only have 9 minutes left, but I could speak about this for hours. So yeah, I mean, of course, immensely valuable. I can honestly say it has changed my life for the better.
Perfect, thank you. And yeah, as you say, we're a little bit short of time, but I think actually there's a question come through on the chat from Hamdallah, which I think is probably a good place to end, because it kind of brings us back to the reason we're all here today, which is obviously the scholarship itself. And Hamdallah would like to know from you guys, how did you translate your African leadership narrative into a compelling case for global relevance during the scholarship selection process. I mean, I think it's important to emphasize that the scholarship is all about the impact that you can make in Africa post completion of the program. So perhaps that need for global relevance is a little bit sort of diluted by that maybe, but I guess more generally just keen to get your thoughts on how to translate your leadership experience in Africa into a compelling scholarship consideration. Who would like to go first?
It was addressed to Linda.
Um,
Do you take it? Yeah.
Thank you. All
Well
right.
spotted.
Okay. So very briefly, I would say that thinking about the work that I do in the development sector, and thinking about the African continent, thinking about the youth in the African continent, the empowering of the youth in the African continent, and what that means even in terms of the economic independence of the African continent, what that means in terms of the security of the continent, what it means even in terms of mobility, okay, to other continents, and making that as safe as possible. I would say, for me, I see my role so clearly as you know how when you're younger you play a game and you throw a stone onto a pool of water, yeah, and then you see the ripples and the ripples and the ripples. So I think for me our work is so key, because that's really what we are trying to do. We are trying to by each of our beneficiaries and their families and the society, etc., to transform the continent. That's it. Yeah? We're going to transform the continent. We are going to make sure that everybody has an opportunity for gainful income. And my dream specifically is an Africa where NGOs such as Kianda Foundation are not necessary. That really is my dream. And I think for me, the Ember is going to be a way in which I can leverage everything that I get from there to make this dream come true.
Perfect. Thanks, Linda. Haley or Lorato, anything to add to that?
Lorato, I feel like I've spoken a lot. I'll let you take it.
Well, I don't know if I'm so when Hamdallah writes global relevance, I appreciate Jonathan's response, and I think the interesting thing about this scholarship, I don't know if it's still the case, Jonathan, but in my year you couldn't specifically apply for the Hasmukh
Perfect. Yeah,
Patel
yeah. So,
Scholarship.
so that's still the case. It's it's
Okay.
everyone who meets the criteria and who applies by the relevant deadline. So in this case, it's March 16th. Everyone will automatically be considered if they meet the criteria. So there isn't a scholarship
Right.
as there is for some of the other scholarships, but
Yeah.
we ask applicants to reflect in their application how they will contribute to ongoing economic development on the continent post
Yeah.
graduation and that kind of thing. So that should come through in the written work,
Okay.
but there's no kind of specific application as such.
Okay. Yeah. And so you already have a little bit more guidance than I think in my year, the one commitment you needed to make or demonstrate was an interest in returning to the continent after the Ember. And and I think the idea of I mean, to Linda's earlier point, when you're sitting in your Ember cohort, the world is represented so um, abundantly, so generously, that there's I think there's a temptation to think, well, I'm applying to Oxford, or I'm applying to the school in the UK that's known all over the world, and therefore my application needs to look a certain way, has to feel a certain way. Um, but I think there's an appreciation, at least. I mean, I don't have any insight into the process, but my sense is there is a real appreciation for what it means to tell a story that is I don't like using the word authentic because I feel like it's been used a lot and it loses a lot of meaning. But your story and the things that you are proud of, if you are able to put them in um, a narrative in an essay that represents you, I think that it's very hard to think about the idea of global relevance in a singular way because when you get in the classroom, you'll realize that every single person in that room exceeds what your expectation would be around global relevance. And it's really an amazing thing because you're not just talking about people from different countries, but you're also talking about people from different professions and industries and backgrounds and experiences. And so I mean, I know it's probably not a very helpful answer, but I think if you can just focus on what is important to you about doing this MBA and how somebody who's trying to think about this through the lens of how does this come back to Africa and how can this be for the good of the continent and what is your heartfelt connection to that message. I think that's the best you can do, and I don't know that you can do better than that.
Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect sort of takeaway to end on, given the subject we're discussing today. And I think, yeah, if I agree with you, if there was another word that we could use other than authentic, then that would be good. But yeah, no, I think that's genuinely good advice for anyone who's preparing an application at the moment and wanting to stand out from the point of view of the of this particular scholarship. So yeah, thank you for that. Hannah, if I could just ask you to share the last slide on the deck, please. Perfect, thank you. So yeah, just before we let everyone go, in terms of next steps. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, I think everyone's at different stages in the recruitment or application process. So if you haven't already, the first step is to submit your CV to our team for review, and then the relevant recruitment manager in your case is most likely me if you're Africa based. We'll come back to you with some feedback on your CV, and then it will be possible to set up a call and hopefully join us at an upcoming event, either like this online or potentially in person. We put on lots of in-person events globally as well, so keep an eye out for all of those opportunities. And yeah, hopefully today has been useful for everyone, just in terms of the spirit behind the Hasmukh Patel Scholarship, a few tips on the application process, and yeah, hopefully you've got a good sense from our panel about their experience on the program and the impact that the program has had both post graduation and during as well. So it's great to get those two different perspectives. But we are pretty much at time now, so I'm gonna let everyone get on with the rest of their afternoons. And yeah, really appreciate you all joining us today. And yeah, feel free to reach out either to myself or another member of the recruitment team if you've got any questions to follow up on based on today. But yeah, thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of the day and week ahead.
Thank you.
Great speaking
Goodbye.
to you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.